Hey, family, it's your sister here, Jocelyn, and I want to welcome you to another episode of Faith on the Journey. And if this is your first time tuning in, I want you to know that we're more than just a show. We're actually a Christian company that wants the world to know that the Bible has the power to heal. And we provide a number of different resources, ranging from biblical counseling to trauma healing groups to other faith tools to help to strengthen your faith, heal your heart, and be an extension of your community. And if you've been following along for the last month, we're actually in the middle of a series called Transforming Your Pain into Purpose. And I've been blessed to interview a number of amazing guests who've talked about the challenges they faced and how God was able to bring them through those difficult times. And now they're using it as fuel to give the enemy hell. And the young woman who I'm having the opportunity to interview today is doing just that. And I'm excited to welcome her to the show. So, we are bringing on Rachael Williams, who is an author. She's a speaker and she's a coach. And she has a passion for helping women to transform their pain into purpose. And I'm so excited to have you here with us.
Thank you so much. I'm super excited to be here with you today.
Yes, yes. So before we get into your new book and all the great things that you're doing right now, I did want to give our listeners an opportunity just to learn a little bit about your backstory and your upbringing. So why don't you start there?
Yeah, of course. So, a lot of my upbringing was shaped by the fact that I was adopted. And I was actually adopted as a little baby. So, pretty much all throughout my childhood, I was raised by my adoptive parents. And that was a struggle because even though I had really great parents who I knew loved me and they chose me, as a kid, I couldn't understand that. All I knew was like, I'm raised by these people because the people who birthed me did not want me. Like, that's how I was thinking as a kid. And so I'm dealing with like issues of abandonment and rejection from, my biological parents. And then also my adoptive father struggled with a drug addiction. And so even though he was in the house, he wasn't really present in the house. And so I felt like I was always competing for my dad's attention because there was every time he would choose the streets and his addiction over his kids, and over his family. And so I'm like, well, dang, like my biological parents gave me up and now I'm living in the house with this father and he's not there to be a father. And so I just like was getting rejection, feeling rejection from both sides.
Wow, that's important that you recognize that now because it's ironic you're speaking of this. Last month I talked a lot about narrative and the narrative that we embrace, the belief that we have about our story, the lens in which we view our circumstances and the things that we're going through. And so it sounds like you had a very strong narrative of rejection and
Mm-hmm.
abandonment that was cycling through your thoughts and experiences in relationships. So I'm curious as to how did that narrative of rejection and abandonment affect your life and manifest?
Yeah, so there was a couple different ways. One way is I was always trying to achieve things. So like in school, in like I was in everything, any and everything, because I was just always trying to achieve to show like I'm good enough to be your daughter. I'm good enough for you to love me. So my grades, I was a great student, and so that was, I guess, a positive thing that came out of it. But then I also, on the other side of that, when I started to get into relationships and I was old enough to start dating, I always said like I would never let another man hurt me the way that my dad had hurt me. And so I was always like choosing the guys that I knew were unavailable to me emotionally because I didn't have to get my feelings involved, but also was just chasing like all the wrong dudes because I was being rebellious. Like I remember my dad used to say like, don't date this type of guy. And I'm like, you're that type of guy. How are you gonna tell me not to date that type of guy? You're this type of guy. So what did I do? I went to go date. I dated those type of guys, honestly, just despite my dad. And so from like the time I started dating, I was immediately in very toxic relationships because that's just what made sense to me.
Wow. Wow. Ooh. And I wonder, I mean, looking back, was some of these things that you were doing, was it on a subconscious level and you just now realize that's what you were doing?
Yeah, it was definitely subconscious. Like back when I was in high school and I started dating, the one guy I was talking about I dated to spite my dad. I knew he was actually selling drugs to my dad. And I'm like, well, if he's going to sell drugs to my dad and my dad's going to give him money, then what am I going to do? I'm going to go get that money back from him. So I'm going to let him take me on dates. I'm going to let him, take me out to expensive dinners. So like subconsciously, I think I was dating these emotionally unavailable guys because they were always like in other relationships, or like I knew they weren't going to be faithful to me. And in the back of my mind, I knew that. But then at the same time, like I was still longing for that love that I never got from my dad. So I knew I was going into relationships with guys that couldn't give me that, but I still wanted it. So it was never going to work out, but I was pursuing it anyway. And now looking back, I can see like, well, that's really toxic. And I probably was dating these guys that were, 8, 9, 10 years older than me because I was missing, that father figure, and I was subconsciously looking for it in them.
Wow, you said a whole lot. And I'm listening to you, and I can relate, and I believe a lot of the people who are watching and listening right now can as well, because we do certain things, and it's it's almost like, first of all, for protection. We know that
Mm-hmm.
you were trying to protect your heart, and you're like, if I don't let people in, then they can't hurt me, and
Yep.
that is based on fear. And a lot of things that we do is driven by fear. Also, when you talked about earlier how you wanted to perform, you were performing for to get, you felt as if to get love, I have to accomplish. I have to
Yep.
work to get love. And a lot of us also have that misunderstanding as it relates to love, as it relates to how even we earn love from God. Many of us feel like we have to perform to have God love us. And so there's a lot of narratives that were shaped at an early age in your life, and it was causing you to make certain decisions that were challenges for
Yeah.
you.
This was all before I was 18. Like going back and looking at it, I'm like, geez, I wasn't even 18 yet. I was making
Man.
these decisions. Yeah.
But it was doing something for you too, because it sounds like it made you feel like you had control, right? So
Yeah.
you couldn't
Absolutely.
control the decisions that your dad was making, but you could say, hey, I'm gonna own this. I'm gonna own like what I'm doing with these guys. I'm gonna get back. So it was a way for you to I guess leverage your anger and pain.
Yeah, absolutely. And honestly, I say that I used to struggle with control issues, but even into my adult life, I was always trying to control every situation because there were so many things in my childhood that just happened to me, and I wasn't going to let things just happen to me. So I had to have my hands in everything. Like nobody was going to control how this was going to work. I was going to be the one controlling it. And so yeah, I see that even now as an adult, I still work with that.
Yeah, I'd be lying if I didn't say I struggle with that. I mean, I think all of us, at some point we struggle with that, when it relates to just our day to day lives, and
Hmm.
control when it relates to our relationship with God. We're always saying like, God, I got this. No thanks. Trying to take control back, right?
Yep.
And so that this was very what you're sharing is crucial, because it goes into what we are talking about next. And actually, before I shift, I do want to learn a little bit about your experiences in college, right? So
Mhm.
you had an interesting experience with a gentleman named Damien, and I want you to share with our listeners what took place there.
Yeah. So I was going into college, and I'm just like this young naive girl, and I'm like, okay, I'm finally away from my parents. I can live the life that I want to live. I felt like I had the ability to create the Rachel that I wanted to be, and I was free from my parents' decisions. So now I'm like, okay, I'm going to decide what I do. This was the very first day I was on campus. I met this guy named Damien through actually a family friend. So it already felt like a safe space for me because I've known this family friend since I was probably like 4 or 5. And he brought me over to dinner to his house with him, his wife, and his family. And his friend was there. And I'm noticing like all night Damien's kind of looking at me. And you can tell when somebody's like looking at you because they're interested, not because they're just looking. So I'm like, let me play this up. Let me see what happens, where this goes. So we actually ended up being in some type of friendship, situationship, relationship thing. I don't even know what to call it, to be honest. But it lasted for about 6 or 7 years. It lasted all the way through like the time that I moved to Dallas and had graduated college. And it wasn't a real like it wasn't a healthy relationship at all because he actually had I found out later he had a living girlfriend who was on and off. So he was kind of playing me when like he was off with her, he was on with me, and when he was off with me, he was on with her. And he would tell me like, man, I have mad love for you. And I'm like 18, 19, and he's probably 28, 29 at the time. He was like 10 years older than me. So I'm thinking, oh my gosh, this guy's older. He likes me. Like he's taking care of me. He's giving me all of these things that like I wanted for my dad. So now here we are. I'm in another phase of life, still looking for this same thing. And I felt like he gave it to me. And it was never even a physical relationship. And so I think that's why I told myself it was okay, because I'm like, okay, I'm not having sex with this guy. So there's like no harm, like nothing's going to happen. But I fell for this man like hard. And I would probably say this was the first time I was ever for real in love. Now looking back, yeah, I don't know why, but it happened. And that, like, it played with my mind for a long time. And I can look back now being old and removed from the situation and be like, that guy really manipulated me, like to the point where I was thinking about literally giving this man money because he was calling himself a rapper or something. I don't know, but he was calling himself a rapper. And I was at the point where I'm like, oh my gosh, I love him so much, I'm going to invest in his future. And that's when my friend was like, no, girl, you need to step out of this. And I was like, oh, you're right. It's money involved. Yes. 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 I was in deep for real. So I'm so grateful for my friend for being like, yeah, no, you need to snap out of this.
That's good. No, I mean, in those moments, it's really difficult. I was in a similar situation with the older guy when I was in college, and it was embarrassing, to be honest, because you know your friends are right,
Mm-hmm.
but it's difficult still to break free of that. And so you're sitting here like, why am I letting him treat me like this? Or am I being stupid? But he says, he
Mm-hmm.
loves me. And so these are things where I think many of us have gone down that road, but it's not just what is happening in that moment. We realize there's something deeper there. The reason why we're there, we have to explore. And that's what it sounds like you did. You were saying, I was looking for the love that I didn't get from my dad. I was still dealing with rejection. I just wanted to be loved. And you were taking anything you could get
Right.
to experience that.
Absolutely. And you know what's wrong. And you said it was embarrassing. And I think that's like good to say because I'm thinking back now and I'm like, nobody really knew except for like one or two close friends and him. And I'm like, if I couldn't tell people about this, then it probably was wrong. Like I didn't tell anybody about this except for like a few close people. And finally, when I told like my now best friend, she was able to be like, okay, this is not right. And so, yeah, I was like, I never told anybody about
Yeah,
it.
because it's a shame associated with it.
Yeah, definitely.
And so with that, I mean, you went through that experience, but you also had something else happen that was really painful. And if you know what I'm referring to, in terms of an experience where you didn't name it at first, you didn't recognize what took place, but then later you
Mhm.
recognized the trauma that you experienced. Could
Yeah,
you talk to me about that?
absolutely. I think that's so important to talk about. So I was actually assaulted in college, and it wasn't until after college that I actually put a name to it. And so there was this night I was at a bar, and I ran into one of the football players at the time, and I knew him kind of from passing, but I didn't like know him. And long story short, I ended up at his house. Didn't expect anything to happen because I was actually a virgin at the time, so I'm like not thinking about having sex with this guy, and he ended up assaulting me that night. And what was crazy was after it happened, like I was like, okay, well, that means he likes me, right? And so now I'm like thinking that I need to chase this dude down. And I would keep running into him on campus because at the University of Iowa, the Black community is like so small. So all the Black people know all the Black people. So you see him out all the time. He sees me out all the time. And this guy used to ignore me. Like if he would see me on campus, he would literally like do everything that he could to not make eye contact with me. And I'm like, hold on, like was this like a bad one night stand? Like, did was what just happened? And that's why I really couldn't process it because that wasn't me. Like, I didn't do that. And so I'm thinking, okay, well, it's my fault. Like, I got in bed with this guy, and it wasn't until I graduated and I was actually at church, and this girl was like telling her story about how her stepfather and then her or maybe her brother-in-law had assaulted her over like years. And as she's telling her story, I'm like crying. And I'm like, why am I crying so hard? Like, you would think that this happened to me. And so I'm like, what is this? And I remember the pastor called me up to pray because he was like, yeah, you're not the only one dealing with that in this room. And he looked at me and he was like, come up and pray. And I'm like, this never happened to me. What are you talking about? And as I'm driving home that night in the car, I'm like, Lord, what are you trying to tell me? And that's when I remembered what happened. And I'm like, wow, he really did rape me. And here I am years later. And the crazy part about it is like, I was still trying to protect him. And as like I feel like that happens all the time as Black women. We're always trying to protect other Black men. And here I am, like now realizing that I was raped by this man and I'm still trying to protect him. Like, that's so crazy to me.
Lord, you said a whole lot in that, Rachel. Powerful stuff, because we do sometimes try to protect the individuals who abuse us.
Yeah.
And we also, you took on the blame of someone else's sin against you. And these are things that the enemy uses to keep us in bondage, because
Mm-hmm.
it isolates you. You keep it, you keep it a secret, and you never are able to name the offense that was committed against you. And so when you did this, when you finally recognized what took place, what did you do with that? Once you named it, how did it also affect your life moving forward? How did you get freed from that?
A lot of prayer. I think it took me a minute to like continue to process it, because that night was the first time I actually was like, okay, this is what it is. And I had to admit that like this did happen to me. And that's actually when I think therapy started for me. Around that time. And so I am a huge advocate for therapy, because I think that like, yes, you talk to God in prayer and people pray for you, and you can overcome through just trusting God. But sometimes you don't even know how to vocalize exactly how you're feeling or what that feeling is. And you need somebody else from the outside to be like, hey, this is what happened. This is why you're feeling that way. You're not crazy for feeling this way. Let's talk through it. And so I went through times where I was like, okay, well, now that I realize it happened, like, do I go back and tell on him? Like, do I just move forward and pretend like it didn't happen? Like, what do I do? And so I had to get to a place where I was at peace with what happened. And I would honestly say it's because of prayer and therapy.
We don't realize how important that is, right? And that's the thing. Yes, we pray, but as we just put on the screen, you also go to therapy. You also talk to
Mm-hmm.
somebody through counseling, because
Yeah.
we need a safe space to process. We need someone who's objective in our life, who can say, yeah, I realize that might have been the narrative that you've told yourself or been convinced of for all these years, but let me share with you maybe something else to consider, and
Right.
help you to start pulling up the roots. Because one thing that we have to realize is that what we see in terms of our behavior and some of the circumstances that are right in front of our faces, that is the result of deeper roots that
Mm-hmm.
have been there, that often need to get plucked up and addressed. But it's very difficult for us to see it ourselves. And so that's why counseling, biblical counseling, as I mentioned earlier,
Yeah.
is extremely important in helping you to unwrap some of those things that are there. So for you, it sounds like it was a serious process. Were there some main things that you took out of your experience in therapy that you think is helpful to share?
Yeah, absolutely. I actually started writing when I went to therapy, because one thing that she suggested was writing things down, because at this point, I hadn't told anyone. And I couldn't tell my mom about this. Like, I talked to my mom about pretty much everything, but like I couldn't tell my mom about this, or my friends, because now I'm still like, I'm feeling embarrassed, and now I'm ashamed that I let this happen. I'm feeling like, dang it, it was my fault. I should have never gotten the car. If I would have never gotten the car, it would have never happened. All of these things. And I couldn't talk to my circle. And so just going to therapy, she was like, okay, you can't tell anybody this, but let's write it down. Because if you're writing it down, you're getting it out. And actually, me writing it down and journaling, like what happened to me and how I felt, was actually what led me into writing books.
Right. I was just thinking that. I'm like, how did you go from like not wanting to share with anything to then getting to the point where you were vulnerable enough to share something like this?
Yeah. I don't know. I really still don't know why or how I did that. I remember that people kept saying, when I told my adoption story in college, because there was like a whole bunch of drama that happened with that. My friends would say, hey, this needs to be a Lifetime movie, girl, like, or you need to write a book about this. And I'm like, no, ha ha ha. And then when I started writing in therapy, I'm like, wait, maybe this really should be a book. And I remember going to a women's conference in, I believe, November of that year. And it was about like purpose and your platform and how you can like inspire other women and be an influencer. So I'm sitting there in the audience and I'm like, okay, God, well, what do you want me to do in this current space? What do you want me to do? And he kept saying, write the book, write the book, write the book. Every time I would pray about, okay, God, what am I supposed to do? Because I heard him, but I was still ignoring it. He would keep saying, write the book. So finally, I'm like, okay, I'm just going to write the book.
You finally listen. That's
Yeah.
funny. Sometimes God, we asking for guidance, and when He gives it to us, we like, not that. You could have did
Right?
that, right?
Not that one. I didn't want to do that.
Yeah, I totally get it, but you did. And how was that journey? How was that process for you of actually bearing some of these difficult stories with
It
others?
honestly felt like reliving a lot of the trauma over again because to that point I still hadn't told anyone. So some of these things like I had talked about in therapy, but some of them I hadn't. And so it was like, okay, I'm processing this for the first time about what really happened. At that point was when I was able to say, okay, this is why I dated these type of guys. Like this is what this guy did to me. This is how why I felt that way. And so it was literally going through therapy all over again, writing that book. So it was actually really hard. But every time I got to a place where it was hard, I'm like, you know what? This is hard, but there's somebody that really needs to hear this. So I can't be selfish and not put it out because it's so exposing. Because there was a time where I was actually done with the book for like a good 2 or 3 months before I even like sent it off to be edited or anything because I'm like, this is so like personal. Like I'm telling people everything about my life. They literally know everything about me after reading this book. And so I held on to that for a minute because it was just really tough to have to live through that again and feel like I was able to release it to people.
My God. So eventually, obviously, you got the courage to do so. And in in making that decision, did you find that the shame that you were feeling, because that's what you're describing as shame that you were
Mm-hmm.
feeling about everything that you went through, did that get released from you after you let it go?
It absolutely did. And I think it started with people like that I didn't even expect coming up to me and saying, hey, something like that happened to me, or I relate with so many parts of your book. People I had known for years, people I'd gone to church with, just so many different women, even women I didn't know were reaching out to me saying, like, wow, this did this for my life. It did this for my life. It helped me move past this. And so when I got to that point, I'm like, you know what? This story and this testimony is supposed to be used to help somebody else, release somebody else from their pain, help them get to the next step in their life. And so when I think about it like that, it's not shameful at all because we all have things that have happened to us in our past, and not all of these things were my fault. Like some of these things I did not have control over and it happened to me. And so I'm not going to be embarrassed by what happened in my past. I'm at the place where I'm taking that, I'm embracing it, and I'm using it for a greater purpose. And I'm also using it to help women discover their purpose as well. So now I'm at the place where it doesn't feel shameful at all.
Amen. Come on, girl. I love that. It's something where I describe testimonies in my book as beauty marks,
Mm,
and because we all have some scars, right? And you can look at the scars that we've accumulated from these different trials in life, and we can be like, "Oh, that's so ugly," and we can have some shame associated with it. But scars represent you survived some stuff. You went
yep.
through some stuff, and I call those beauty marks. And being able to boldly share that with others, and the thing that you said that I think is so real, and it's real for me. I've experienced it too. Is you often feel like when you go through those dark seasons that you're the only one. No one would understand. And then when you finally get the courage to share, and you might not be called, those who are watching, to share your testimony with the world, but maybe sharing it with a retreat, a small group, when you share your story and realize that other people have gone through similar things and they've made it, and you're not alone. The Bible talks about nothing new under the sun. Like this is
Mm-hmm.
different trials we go through, right? But it's not what happened to you. It's what you do in response to those things, understanding who you are, and you can be a better person on the other side of this. And that's one thing that I really focus on in the work we're doing with Faith on the Journey. I'll talk about how pain and suffering is going to happen. We can't avoid it. It is part of this journey called life. But when you're in the fire, is how you respond, and it's
Yep.
an understanding of who you belong to, which is God, that's
Mm,
going to bring you through that situation. So it doesn't have to destroy you. It doesn't have to be this mark that you can't get beyond. No, you can get through, and you are a living testimony of that. And so I thank you for just talking about your process. And I think the one thing I'm very curious about is how you ended up getting to the title of your book, which is "I Am." Like, what does that mean when you said "I am"?
yes. So you know what? I can't take credit for it, actually. It like just honestly just popped in my head one day, and I'm like, I am. That's a really good title. And then I was like, oh, I can start every chapter with I am, and then something else. And I'm like, this is perfect. And then as I was going through the writing process, I'm like, you know what? I should change this because I am is kind of generic. Like I should go with something else. And my husband's like, why would you change that? Like, that is so powerful in itself. He was like, it has so many meanings. Like, I am as in like this is the person that you are. You're walking into your identity. I am as in the great I am because God is the great I am. And he was like, why would you change that? I am is so powerful. And so now when I look at it, it's such a bold statement of like, this is who I am. I'm walking in this. I'm embracing the person that I am. I'm embracing the pain that makes me who I am. I'm embracing my story. And then also knowing that like I am this way because God is the great I am. And so I think
Yes,
that's how it all
speak
came
up,
to me.
girl.
Yes.
Yes, and just shout out to the husband.
Yes.
Isn't it amazing just to have someone who's like, come on, you know, like pushing you, and he's right. That's a powerful name, and
Mm-hmm.
I'm glad you moved forward with that. And I wanted to ask you, ultimately, after writing this book, what is the main message, takeaway, lessons that you want to make sure that your readers walk away from after reading it?
I would say, honestly, just being able to understand fully who you are in Christ, because that just shapes so much of who you are and just how you live your life. Because if you've been listening to this, then we've talked about how, like, this narrative of feeling like I'm abandoned, I've been rejected, that led me to all of these really bad decisions. But if I know that, like, I'm strong, I'm powerful, I'm beautiful because God says I am, then I'm going to walk a different way. And so the important thing is just being able to recognize and walk in who God says that you are.
That's it. That's it. Knowing that you are loved, that you are not abandoned, and just understanding the importance of adopting the narrative that God has already given you, that you're
Mm-hmm.
beloved. And it sounds like that you have done that, Rachel. And I'm excited to hear about all the things that God's going to do in your life. And I guess before we get to my final question, what are you up to now outside of your book? Is there some other things that you're kind of getting into to help people live out their
Yeah, so
purpose?
the book honestly just launched so many things that I didn't expect. Because when I started, the important thing for me was just to get the message out. And if I sold one book or a million, like obviously you want to sell books, but if I sold just one book and somebody's life was changed from that, that was enough for me. But actually, it sparked into so many other things. Now I get to coach women on how to walk into their purpose because there's so many women that don't even recognize like what exactly purpose is and how to walk into that. So now I get to coach women on how to find that. And then I also am working on book two, which is really diving more into purpose. So book one was really focused a lot on identity, and now book two is focused on just knowing and being able to walk in your purpose.
We're gonna have you back on the show. You gotta let me know. You gotta let me know. That's exciting, Rachel. And I believe we put the information up on the screen. But again, share with our listeners how the best way to get in contact with you.
Yes. So my website is Rachael Williams.com. I usually spell it, but it's on the bottom, so I won't spell it this time. And then I'm also on Instagram, and it's Rachael Williams _.
Awesome. I encourage you all to check her out. She has a free ebook for you. So to bless our community, you will be blessed by what you are experiencing with Rachel. So I appreciate you. I wanted to ask one other question. I ask every guest on the show this. Our show is called Faith on the Journey. And I want to know, what does that mean to you?
Yeah, my faith is honestly just a huge part of who I am. That just it shapes so much of the decisions I make, the way I live my life, and I also feel like this is a journey. Purpose is a journey. Life is a journey, and you have to continue to have faith as you're walking through because you're going through different seasons and different phases of your life. I wasn't always where I am now, but I had faith when I was at that lower place that God was going to bring me out of that, and when I hit another low place in my life, I'm sure there's going to be another low. I'm going to have continue to have faith that God is continuing to carry me through that journey. And so for me, it's just walking in faith every single day as you continue to go through this journey of life.
Amen. Well, you keep that up. I'm excited to watch from far and cheer you on as God continues to use you. And again, thank you so much, Rachel, for being on the show and sharing your testimony of faith.
Yes, thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely, absolutely. And again, for those of you who are tuning in for the first time, I hope this is not your last. Please be sure to subscribe and also check out all the amazing resources we have available through our company. Again, this is not just a show. We offer biblical counseling, we offer healing groups, and a number of other resources to help you heal and strengthen your faith. So join our community and be sure to tune in next week for another broadcast as we help to grow your faith on the journey. So until next time, you keep your faith on the journey, and we'll see you soon. Take care, everybody.